as League of Legends, and indeed when StarCraft 2 got bigger, continues to grow, and there's a lot more money invested in top players, and you have people who are talented players, and maybe they can get to a certain level of success, but something holds them back from being the best, or they break down at certain moments, or they can get to the final of a tournament but they won't win it, or they can be great in their region, but then they come to the international tournament and something just goes wrong. And it's not just skill wise we're talking about here, something goes wrong mentally in terms of their competitive spirit isn't quite there the same. This is where in real sports the topic of sports psychology would be brought up. And if you have the money, you'd invest in a sports psychologist. Like apparently SK Gaming has used one. We hear apparently Curse has used one at some point in time. Different people have brought this aspect that's used in real sports over into esports, and they've started to apply it here. And why is it so important? Because what's interesting is this bias against it, and this idea that it's not necessary, or that some of these people kind of maybe it's overrated what they can do. It's interesting is that happens in sports. Like a great example that made me think of this topic was I was reading about Andy Murray, and Andy Murray is one of the best tennis players in the world. Like right now, I think he's ranked like second or third. Actually, that can't be right. I think he's ranked fourth, actually. He's ranked top 4 anyway. And in history, he's made a lot of finals. He's made something like, I think he's made like 10 finals or something like that. Can that even be right? Maybe 8 finals. I think it might be 8 finals he's made of Grand Slams, these massive tournaments. Now, some of the greatest players of all time, some of them might be only nearing 8 or so finals in terms of all-time great players, like your top 15 sort of players. Some of those won't be that high. But out of those 8, he's only won 2. He's only won 2 finals. Now, why has he only won 2 out of that many? Now listen, yes, he's played some of the, like in every final for a start, he's played Roger Federer or Novak Djokovic, who are some of the greatest players ever, way above him on the ladder. But that's one factor as to why he isn't winning. But that's the thing. He's beaten Federer in finals before, in big matches before. He's beaten Djokovic in finals. If he can do this, why can't he win these majors on more of a regular basis? There's always been a mental aspect with Andy Murray. He's always fell down in this particular sense. And so when it was brought up years in the past, the idea that he should try a sports psychologist, he actually said that he tried one, but that he didn't think it was worth it. Like he said, like I have a quote I've written down here. He said, "I don't think counting to 10 helps when you're playing in the semi-finals of a Grand Slam or at centre court at Wimbledon against one of the best athletes in the world." And the idea that he's saying there is like, he'd obviously be given this technique that if he was in trouble and he was like, he's having problems, then they would tell him like, just count to 10, just let you know, focus on that. And then he would do it. And then he'd say, well, that didn't help me. Like the point still went wrong. And plus, why is that going to help me? Like, does that guy need to count to 10? And what do you know about playing it? You know, he's taking all these implications from it. And then he also said that the problem is that a sports psychologist, there's another quote, doesn't know what it feels like or the best way to deal with things because they haven't been there. Now, this is when he was much younger, by the way, but these are very natural, obvious pieces of rhetoric to use. But if you actually think about what the sports psychologist is trying to do there, I'll try and reverse engineer the approach here, okay? So telling him to count to 10 when he's in a big moment. The idea there is not, the goal is not just to be able to say inside his head 1, 2, 3, 4, 5. That's not the goal. What they're really trying to accomplish here is to find a way to take all that's going on and all the thoughts that could be going in his mind and for a moment shut them out or put them in the background. Because by thinking about the 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, first of all, it's getting you into a rhythm. You're calming down a little bit. Your heart rate goes down a bit. You're breathing in and out. You're not thinking so much about the other stuff, which will still be there. Some of those thoughts will still be rattling around in your brain and firing in and trying to interrupt, as anyone who's ever tried meditation will know. But for at least a moment or to a degree, you're kind of lessening the noise a little bit. You're going to focus on this a tiny bit. This is something where he's missed the point of it in that sense. This would help you. This is a very, very simplistic form of meditation, essentially. In terms of that the psychologist guy doesn't know what it's like to be there. That's another problem with this concept, which is going to pervade into esports as we see people trying to get these psychologists. They're going to think, well, he's never played in a big pressure league of management. He doesn't know what it's like. No, that's the whole point, though, is that he's studied, in theory, what people are like under pressure in all sorts of situations. Snipers in the army, people who are in boxing matches and they're losing, animals when they're in certain fight or flight type modes. They've studied these situations. They know what happens to the body. They know what happens to the mind. They know techniques for what you can do to calm the body down, to center the mind. They've studied these aspects. Whether they've been in that situation is irrelevant because they've studied it and they can give you things that can help you. And they, you know what? They can question you. They can get to know you. They can analyze you. They can see, does something different happen to you from other people in that situation? They can start trying to give you answers, some help with that. This is some of the things that are going to need to happen, okay? A sports psychologist, what he can do for someone in esports. First of all, like I just said there, he can examine the player directly. He can start to look before we get into the other things. Because the problem with a lot of this aspect is the psychological aspect is also going to be like emotional things that have happened in the past, the way you think of yourself. So one of the things he's going to have to do, he's going to have to look at the player and examine him directly. He's going to have to say, what is this guy's goals? What drives him? And this is going to be something he's going to ideally question the player and get answers back, and they're going to work through it together. And the psychologist isn't going to say, oh, this is what drives you and this is your goals. He's going to listen, and he's going to try and help that guy come to these conclusions himself and figure out for himself the process of who is he and what does he want to accomplish and what's really driving him there. Like, is he being driven there out of a fear of failure, that if I don't become the best, then it'll never mean anything in my, these are interesting things that if you can get to the bottom of them, this can maybe help you unravel the problems that you're facing. Whereas on the surface, you just look at it like, oh, for some weird reason, I always just miss that serve when I'm in that situation. Or, when I'm in a League of Legends match there, like, listen, normally I'm really great at hitting skill shots, but I just whiffed them there and I flashed too early and I fucked it up. And no, what's the causes for that? What emotional state were you in? What mental aspects were going on? What were the internal voices saying to you? How did you go into the match? So again, he's going to ask him, what happens when he faces difficult situations? What's this guy's mentality? When he's against a better opponent, how does he conceptualize how the matchup will go before he plays it? Does he think of like, oh, this is what could happen? This is what, does he, if it's a better player, does he think, oh, I just hope that doesn't happen, and goes into it with kind of like a worried state already? Is he able to just think of like, well, here's the things that he could do, and here's the things I can do, and here's what I'll try and steer the game towards? Is he intimidated by better players? If he plays a better player, is his whole game predicated on being the best, on believing he's better? This is something I believe has happened to some of the Dignitas players in CSGO, where they would get to these semis and crush these lower teams. But against teams that they kind of knew were better, people like Device would play someone like Get Right, and that's why they'd crumble, because they kind of knew that he's better than me. And their whole game was to predicate on kind of dominating the other guy, bullying him in that sense. So do they fall apart in that sense? Can the guy break down his win conditions? Does he know going into a game, okay, here's my strengths and what I'm going to try and do. Here's my opponent's strengths, what he's going to try and do. Here's my opponent's weaknesses, what he doesn't want me to do. Here are my weaknesses, what I don't want him to do. And then look at how that'll match up in the game and get a sense of like, okay, here's what could happen. At all times in the game, be able to look back and go, okay, things are going wrong, right? What are the win conditions? Am I heading towards them right? Is that going to work now? Breaking the game down in this way, because then there's not as much fear. It's just analysing a problem and looking for solutions. It's not this one thing of like, got to do something to win and oh, what's happening to me? I wish this wasn't. It's none of those aspects. When a player's behind in a game, how does he react? What does he think about? Does he get overwhelmed by it? Does he try and just block it out? Is it kind of like he's just trying to like force everything away, but that's making it press in even more? Is he someone who just ignores it and refuses to accept anything? He's like, it's going fine. This is all fine. It's like that meme, like that guy who's just burning that like dog drinking that coffee in that burning house. Like, this is fine. My whole life's career's going to shit. I'm choking like a motherfucker, but this is fine. Like, is he one of those guys? I've seen people with that ostrich syndrome, blocking it out, put your head in the sand, don't want to believe it exists. When you're behind, I'll give you a great example of this, actually. I just thought of one. Nanoa, a friend of mine from StarCraft 2, a guy who made many finals, many semi-finals, but he very rarely ever won. And against the best Koreans, he could beat them in the semi-final, but the same person, if he played him in the final, he could lose to. He told me when he was in these pressure situations, when he was behind, when he had problems, he would actually get paralyzed physically. The mental effect would affect his body, and he would feel like he couldn't move his hands, like a nightmare. His hands were moving slower and slower, and he couldn't control it, and he'd feel like an electric surge running through his body, and he was rigid and he couldn't move. And this is clearly a mental aspect affecting his body. But also, if he could have broken it down, maybe there's physical techniques he could have done to center himself, or to take a breath, or to just pose and to play more defensive for a second, to recoup in that sense. No, these are problems. One of the problems a lot of players who choke and who get behind this sense isn't that they don't make plays and they just don't do anything and they lose. A lot of the time, another reaction is to try and get it all back in one go. They made some mistakes earlier, they're in a bad spot. So instead of finding the correct win conditions to win, they just try to force anything. They go for some crazy out there play in League of Legends. They just go for the Baron out of nowhere where they're not going to win that fight and they can't take the fight. And if they come, they're fucked. They go for some crazy balls deep play, and that makes it even worse, and they totally throw the whole game before they even had a chance to. They didn't have a chance to get back in the game. It's not like the Cloud9 solve the problem, figure out what we do. Can we win a little battle here? Can we transition that into a lead here? Can we make small leads add up into a bigger lead? Is there the right fight, but we'll take it later on our terms? They're not able to do this. They can't grind. They can't get these small little victories, partly because they can't visualize it. They're getting trapped in by their emotions. They don't know what they're going to do in this situation. They only knew how to front run and have everything work for it, and now that it's not working, that's fucking them up. They can't visualize the avenues that lead to success. There have been studies done on people who practice visualization, even of simple things like making free throws, and the people who practice it versus control groups who don't, of similar skill level before they do these studies, the ones who visualize doing it over and over and make this part of it, they hit more free throws and they're able to make a higher percentage and they're able to succeed more. Now, yes, part of it's that maybe in visualizing in that sense, they gain more confidence in it and they're not as worried about it and they feel like they understand the motions of it. There's not as much thought to even go there. It becomes more automatic. That's all great. You'd also go to sort of like the Phil Jackson style basketball coaching style, which is all about this. It's about these ideas of he would have players practice without a basketball. Because what he's trying to get them to do there, maybe they didn't understand this, is actually look at what their movements are without the ball. Yeah, once they get the ball and they throw it, if it all works, they get the ball, catch it, and they throw it. They think to themselves, right, well, that works. But if they looked at the fundamentals of it, then maybe they'd say, oh, actually, even though that worked, like that's not as perfect as it could be. I don't have my movements down exactly. I have to learn how to do this, visualize it, so that when it then comes to me, it's all second nature. Like there's something to this, and it's not that the player has to understand it. It just has to work for him, and he just has to be open to it and accept it and at least try. Now, if you're going to train, this is where the sports psychologist can come in as well. How do you train? What do you think of psychologically when you're in training? Because I've known so many great players who were monsters in practice. Unreal. I mean, a great example is Mithy in League of Legends. This guy was unreal in practice. I've heard these stories from totally different people who don't know that I've asked other people. And I'll be talking to them about their teams. And they'll just bring up these stories about how, like, he's a god in laning. Like, you can't lane versus him. He can pick anything he wants. He can bully you. He can dominate. You can create the fights he wants. He controls everything. There's nothing you can do against him. But you watch him in these big pressure matches, and time again, he's flunked. He's fallen apart. He's played passively. He hasn't bullied and dominated that way. He's had these big problems. This is because his training isn't matching what's happening in the game. Now, part of that is in training. If you're someone who has these problems, you can actually try and recreate those situations. It won't be the same as in a match, but you can put yourself in difficult situations over and over again. I know in MMA, one of the great things that people who are training for Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu matches do, like exhibition tournaments, is these guys who are some of the best in the world will purposely go to a gym and have it arranged so that all the best black belts from that gym line up, wait in a line, and then they take them on one-on-one. And the idea is, yeah, versus all of them separately, they might be better than them. But after the first 2 or 3, they're going to be exhausted. And so what's going to happen is they're going to be constantly getting choked out, wrecked, and they're just going to be fighting from the most difficult, exhausted, versus the best people in the world, hardest situation. But that's going to mean that their confidence is going to be mega when they come to the jump. They're going to know, I can face everything, I can get out of every bad situation, I can fight when I'm in a terrible situation, and I've done every single possible scenario here. I can't be put into a weird situation that's going to happen that won't have happened before. To give you an esports example of this, a player I actually respected because he once described something like this to me, but not in those terms. He just described it naively as an example. But this is what was happening. There was a Counter-Strike player, a North American guy called Jaden. And famously, actually, he used to choke at all his first tournaments. He repeatedly choked at these CPLs, bombed them, but eventually he picked it up, and he was never a great player, but he was a good player in his era, good AWPer, just like a confident sort of guy. And one of the things he told me he did to train was he would play public mode of CS, and he would play the map Aztec. And the whole point of Aztec, why it's a shit map, was even in public mode, well, in fact, especially in public mode, it's one of the worst maps to be on terrorist side. Everyone who ever plays Aztec on public mode goes to CT, and essentially it's just a firing range. The terrorists can't get out the door. You're all aiming at that immediately. You can get there faster if you're CT. They can't go through the water because you're shooting down and killing them. The only way to win on terrorist side of Aztec is either outshoot someone directly in difficult situations, long range, or work as a team and coordinatedly get out with flashes and go as a team, which isn't going to happen on a public. So what he would do is purposely pick the terrorist side, that bad side, and go first every time. He would run out of this main door first every time by himself, where you're definitely going to die, by the way. It's impossible that you'll kill like 15 people. That's their total scrubs. If they're even close to your level, you're going to get killed, if not in the first 5, within the first 2 or 3, they're going to take you out. But he would purposely do this over and over, the most difficult, most precious situation to train himself to be able to do it. So that when he was in a real match, not on that map, but on a difficult situation, he could go into these situations and know that, okay, listen, I don't have a fear of death in this situation. I'm just going to try and get this shot here, and I can see that guy. Okay, my aim now is to kill him and win this one-on-one. Doesn't matter if this next guy is going to come and kill me. That's not going to get in my way of me making this shot here. This is the mentality. This is where I'm not a psychologist in any sense. I haven't studied sports psychology, but you can see where I can see some of the benefits and where it can be applied here. Now, listen, some of these people will come in, won't be the best at this. Like in every area, you can be a bad sports psychologist. You can be crap at it. You can be misapplying yourself. Same way you can, by the way, you can be a very good coach in sports or even in esports, but not be right for this team or this sort of player. And maybe you don't connect with that guy. This is all the case, but you can see how there's benefits to this area, how it can be beneficial in terms of application or even just the concepts taken by players and applied to themselves. because this is something that will help esports, whether it is CSGO, Dota 2, League of Legends, StarCraft 2, all of them, because it's about performance and it's about how do we train and how do we think about how do we perceive ourselves, how do our emotions affect us, how does the mind affect the body, how do we control the body, because it's about all these topics that are fundamental to succeeding, even though they're not game mechanical aspects. This is how we can attenuate our success, how we can get the most out of it, how we can become consistent, how we can learn not to be overwhelmed. This is how we can be happy and satisfied playing. This is where sports psychology can help esports if applied. This episode was sponsored by Vulcan. So if you want to play some fantasy League of Legends, go to vulcan.com. And if you use the promotion code Thorin with 3 O's, so THOOORIN, then you can sign up there and you'll get a deposit bonus where whatever you put in up to $1,000, they'll match 100%. So you put in $10, you'll get 20, you put in 50, you'll get another 50, you'll have 100, up to $1,000. And you can play Fantasy League of Legends there. You make a team, you have a certain salary cap and you spend it on the players you want, and then everyone can get whatever players they want. And then whoever wins gets whatever prize purse, and you can play Fantasy League of Legends there if that's your bag.